YouTube, Casey Anthony was just acquitted of murder. She was found guilty of lying to police, but really, that's not a big problem. She'll get, a couple years, which will probably end up being a couple months in total. Here's what I think about the case, and I held off making a video about it because I wanted to wait until after the original hype was over. I predicted weeks ago she'd be acquitted on these charges. Number one, just based on the fact that there was no real solid evidence to link her to it, but here's my thoughts. I think Casey Anthony was raped by her father. I think she threatened to go forth and talk about it to the police or whoever, and I think that George Anthony, who is her father, raped her and fathered the child. I think she could prove it, and I think he then took the child and dumped it, killed it and dumped it or whatever, and I believe that he is the one that's guilty of murder. I think the reason why he and his wife walked out of the courtroom is because now they know he's likely to be the next big suspect in the murder. I think that eventually they'll find him guilty, and I think that this whole story will unravel, and I think that you'll find that what I'm saying now is right. I think he threatened Casey Anthony, and I think that that's the reason she waited so long to do anything about it, and why eventually it wasn't her who actually did anything, it was the grandmother. I think finally the grandmother's conscience caught up to her, and she, of course, was willing to put the blame on her daughter to protect her husband. I think the way he acted in court proves that he's got something to hide, whereas Casey Anthony just sat there most of the time moping. I think she's a psychologically damaged individual. I think that she's emotionally compromised in a million different ways, and I think that probably has to do with the fact that she's been molested and raped by her father. Her behavior is consistent with that sort of pattern. There you have the lying, the fact that she didn't do anything about it. If she was under duress and under threat, of course she's not going to say anything about it. I think that the grandparents waited, and I think they planted evidence. They made the car smell like decomposition, or they just used her car to dump it in the first place, dump the baby, that is, in order to put blame on her. I think they're terrified now, and I think they're angry, because now Casey Anthony has been acquitted, and I think, like I said, George Anthony is the next one they're going to go after. But I predicted that she'd be acquitted. I was talking with my dad a couple weeks ago, and I was like, what do you think? He thought, of course, they'd find her guilty, and I'm like, I don't think they're going to find her guilty. I think the lack of evidence is enough to prevent her from being found guilty on those charges, and the fact that George Anthony is such a suspicious character, I think he did it. That's my own thoughts. I think there's just too many coincidences in the case to say that it was certainly someone connected with that general group. Now, who else has any motive to do that? If the father really was abusive, maybe he was sexually abusive too, it's perfectly kosher to say that he could have fathered the child, and then his wife and him concocted the plan to wait a long time to do that, and of course threatened Casey in order to make it look like she was guilty. I think that probably he threatened to kill her or whatever. That's my own thoughts about the case, but it's wonderful that she's been acquitted, because really, any time that there's a media circus surrounding a case, there's always the chance that the jury will find them guilty just out of a sense of duty to the media and to the public. I think that everyone wanted to railroad her. Oh, well, she's guilty, just look at the way she acts. And they lose perspective on the actual case. They lose perspective on the lack of evidence. They lose perspective on the fact that there's some controversy surrounding other characters that are included within that family group, and they call for a railroading. And personally, that's what I think happened to Charles Manson. I think that's what happened in that case. I was slightly worried that would happen in this case. Of course, that happens to be not the case. She was acquitted. And so it's wonderful to see someone who's, in my own opinion, perfectly innocent of any crimes. I think it's wonderful to see her with the possibility of soon being free. I think the media circus was unwarranted to begin with, because you look at it this way, anytime there's a young white woman involved in a crime, it automatically gets headline news. Young white girl gets abducted, young white girl gets raped, young white girl gets sold into sex slavery, young white woman commits murder, young white woman whatever, and it's an international crisis. If she was black, nobody would have cared. If it was a male, nobody would have cared. You have this bizarre fascination with young white women in this culture. So it was unfortunate that the case exploded the way it did. But because she was acquitted, it's sort of a good thing, because now her name's been cleared in front of the entire world. The only thing she did was lie to the police, which, if I was under threat of death from my incestuous father, I probably would do that too. So I think George Anthony's eventually going to fry in the electric chair, get gassed, or whatever they do down in the Neanderthal state of Florida, which is run by people like, Rick Scott. So it's not exactly the most kind, gentle place on earth to be. It's still kind of a rugged, rough and tumble land. But I think you're going to see George Anthony within the next few years. He's going to go to jail. That's only my thoughts, but that's a prediction. I correctly predicted that she'd be acquitted. I suppose I should have made a video voicing that opinion so that it would seem more legitimate, but at the time I was just avoiding the fact that everyone was talking about the case, so I was like, fuck it. But she has been acquitted on those charges, so she is innocent, which she should have been because there was no evidence, and that's just some predictions, because that's what I think is, honestly, that's what I think is going to happen. I think you're going to see George Anthony go away for a very, very long time. Which he deserves, because he seems like a complete asshole anyway. And his wife was just defending him. So, that's